I now have the pleasure to introduce some of my colleagues, beginning with Anne Grady, a fellow in objects conservation. Anne began working in conservation in 1999 as a book conservator. In 2004, she undertook a graduate degree in art conservation and shifted her focus from books to objects conservation. Since then, she has completed internships at the Metropolitan Museum and the Worcester Museum of Art, working on a diverse range of artworks from large-scale modern sculpture to pre-Columbian statuary. Upon receiving her graduate degree from Buffalo State College in 2007, she served a year-long Andrew W. Mellon Fellowship at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And she is currently Sherman Fairchild Fellow in Objects Conservation here at the Met, and she has been focusing on late 19th century American decorative arts, including two of the American Wing's most splendid and precious pieces of enameled silver. And happily for all of us, her fellowship has been extended for another year, during which time she will continue to examine this topic more fully. Anne's lecture this afternoon is entitled Technical Analysis and Treatment of Two 19th Century Enameled Vases, produced by Tiffany & Company. Please welcome Anne Grady.
Thank you, Beth. Good afternoon. Is there a laser pointer? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry. This afternoon, I will be presenting the ongoing technical analysis and treatment of two significant works from the American Decorative Arts collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Adams Vase, designed by Paulding Farnham, seen here on the left, and the Magnolia Vase, designed by John T. Curran, on the right. Both pieces were produced by Tiffany & Company at the end of the 19th century, at a time when the company was focused on establishing itself internationally. And to that end, the Adams Vase was shown at the Paris Exposition Universelle of 1900, and the Magnolia Vase was the centerpiece of the fine silver display at the Chicago Columbian Exposition of 1893. Each World's Fair display was a means Tiffany & Company used to demonstrate that it was not merely a commercial concern, but that their designers and craftsmen were producing great works of remarkable achievement and artistry. Farnham and Curran achieved prominence in the company quickly. Both were promoted at the age of 31 to head of silver design and jewelry design, respectively, upon the death of Edward C. Moore, the head designer and mentor to both men. These works were seminal accomplishments in each of their careers and primary figures in establishing the preeminent reputation that the name Tiffany carries to this day. The renovation of the American Wing provided a rare opportunity while both vases were off view to undertake this analysis and treatment, working in collaboration with conservator Linda Borsch of the Sherman Fairchild Conservation Center and curator Beth Weiss and research associate Medell Higgins-Harvey of the American Decorative Arts Department. In 1891, Paulding Farnham had only recently been named head of jewelry design when he received a commission from the American Cotton Oil Company to design a vase in honor of Edward Dean Adams, the company's recently retired chairman. The board of the company wanted Farnham to produce a grand gesture which would fully express their gratitude to Adams for successfully saving the company from insolvency, to be composed only of materials, and I quote from the commission, from the rivers and mountains of America. He, in turn, produced one of the finest examples of American presentation ware from the end of the 19th century. The Adams Vase is 19.5 inches tall, made of solid gold, mined from the Ruby Mine in Forest City, California, chosen specifically for its yellow-green tone, which Farnham felt would best offset its design. There are over 200 semi-precious gemstones and pearls set into the body and handles, including tourmalines from Maine, amethysts from Pennsylvania, garnets from Virginia, and freshwater pearls from the Ohio River Basin. The base is made of gold quartz, also from the Ruby Mine. The lid is a solid piece of rock crystal, topped with a small piece of smoky quartz and a tourmaline, also all from the state of Maine. Farnham's heavily ornamented, classically influenced design was significantly more traditional than much of his contemporaries. The design is comparable to other two-handled presentation silver of the period, but the use of gold and such skilled craftsmen elevated this work beyond similar pieces. And these are his two preparatory drawings. He studied the cotton plant assiduously at all stages of development and meticulously worked this into the design. The body of the vase recalls the shape of the cotton flower, and the enamel colors, seen right here, seamlessly flow into one another as they would in nature, from the brown enamel at the bottom representing the roof, moving into the purple and white stem, and finally the green young buds and leaves. The rock crystal bursting from the sides of the handles signified the young bolls emerging from their husks. The brown enamel, seen here, at the top and bottom of the vase evokes the splitting of the husk of the mature plant, and this imagery was brought full circle with the small green tourmaline at the top of the lid, representing the seed found at the base after the cotton boll had been removed. The decoration on the sides of the vase was used to both laud Adams' accomplishments and his qualities. On one side, the figure of modesty is depicted, flanked by a herald on each side holding garnet trumpets. The opposite side was decorated with the figure of genius, agriculture on his right and commerce on his left. And some of the most challenging metalwork is on this side of the vase, where the proper left leg of genius, right here, the wings on his helmet, and the pitchfork of agriculture are all at least partially proud of the surface. The figures at the bottom depict atlas and husbandry, and the beavers are meant to represent industry. Farnham was entirely dedicated to the idea that this vase would be a masterpiece of American handcraftsmanship, and to this end, 3 draftsmen, 15 modelers, 18 goldsmiths, 21 chasers, 12 finishers, 4 molders, 3 turners, 2 enamelers, 3 stone cutters, and 2 lapidaries were all involved in bringing this piece into fruition. Tiffany & Company were so proud of the accomplishments of their designer and craftsman, it released a pamphlet detailing the manufacturing process, and these are some images from that pamphlet. Farnham's design called for the body, the figures and beavers on the base, as well as the falcons and their swags, all to be hammered by hand into shape from gold sheet. And the flat sheet used for the body of the vase is seen in this image here. It was slowly and meticulously shaped into a hollow vessel by hammering the metal against a convex surface. This process is referred to as raising. And this image here shows the vase at an early stage in the raising process. The metal body was regularly turned while it was being hammered to bring the sides up evenly into the shape that was seen here, and then it was hammered smooth. The modeling of the figures and the background lattice of leaves was completed by repoussé and chasing. Repoussé, from the French term to push, refers to the technique of modeling sheet using various punches and hammers from the inside of the hollow vessel. One end of the tool would be placed against the metal surface, and the other was hit with a hammer to push the metal out. The outside of the vase was coated with pitch to support the gold while it was being shaped, and this technique was used to roughly model the figures in design. And this image here shows the repoussé work that was used to roughly create the figures of modesty and her heralds. So this was taken after the pitch was removed. The finished design was produced by chasing. Chasing is a technique, often following repoussé, where craftsmen work from the outside of the vessel using steel punches of various shapes to create fine lines and details. Like repoussé, the tool is held against the surface and hit with a hammer to manipulate the surface of the metal. The inside of the vase was coated with pitch, again, to support the thin gold while the final chasing was completed. The piece now owned by the Metropolitan is actually the second vase that was constructed. Craftsmen had spent 18 months on a previous version when it was stolen from the Tiffany studios, along with several other works, and never recovered. They were forced to begin again, and judging by the location of the figure of modesty in this picture, I actually believe this image is probably of that first vase. And this is an image that's taken from inside the vase, and these hammer marks right here are an example of what the repoussé marks would look like, and these correspond to the leaves on the front side of the vase. This is a photomacrograph taken of the front surface of the vase with the digital microscope, showing some of the chasing tool marks. As I said, the final shaping and finishing of this work were all chased from the front, and this image shows the range of tools that the craftsman employed to produce the varying textures seen in the final piece. During examination, a red accretion was found on the surface, significantly affecting the appearance of the gold. The scientific research department at the Metropolitan was able to identify the secretion as a gold-silver sulfide tarnish. And this is the tarnish secretion that I'm referring to. It was so thick in some areas, particularly in the base, where it actually had turned the gold black. Additionally, salt crystals had formed across the brown enamel and the falcons at the top of the vase. Microdiffraction analysis identified this salt as masconite, an ammonium sulfate soluble in water. And this image shows the salt crystals on the falcon. The vase also had chipped enamels and discolored fills from a previous restoration. The tarnish was reduced slowly in consultation with curators to reestablish the original yellow-green tone of the gold surface. The salts were removed with deionized water, and this picture on the left was taken after salt removal, and the tarnish was reduced on one side of the vase. So this side had completed treatment, and this side was yet to be treated. And this is an image of the vase after removal of the salt and the red tarnish. The design of this piece was extremely complex, requiring skillful and precise manipulation of the gold. And one of the most interesting aspects of this project has been to record how these effects were achieved and supported by craftsmen. The light shining through the proper left leg of genius here gives an indication of how thin the gold was in some areas and how difficult this task must have been. This decorative element, the leg of genius, was created by cutting a flap of gold out of the body of the vase. This flap was pulled away from the body and then worked into the shape seen in these two images, here and here. The gold on either side of the gap that was left was then worked out to bridge the empty space and then soldered together. And this patch right here was placed on the back to support the join, which was largely masked by the leg. Though in this image you can see it as this slightly lighter vertical line running behind the leg. All of these dark areas in this image are actually the accumulation of tarnish over solder joins. These are either mending breaks in the gold or actually supporting other patches. In every aspect, Farnham and the craftsmen under his direction showed thorough attention to detail. For example, the setting of the tourmalines in the vase without a backing, allowing for more translucence and an overall brighter appearance. And this is an image of the tourmalines from the outside, and this is the inside of the vase. They're just drilled a hole in the decorative garland and set the settings in. This attention to detail was also present in the masking of all attachments and seams in the body. The handles were held onto the body with pins that were actually masked in these flowers. The center stamen is actually the pin that's going through to hold the handle in place. And these leaves that are pointed to right here are actually soldered into place. We were able to discover that they were soldered because there was no repoussé hammer marks on the inside to indicate that they had been put on by hand. And they're covering a join between this garland and the bottom part of the vase. This work is a truly remarkable example of hand craftsmanship and American ingenuity, and over time its impact has not lessened. It continues to extol the virtues and accomplishments of the man it was presented to, but even more, the Adams Vase embodies the exuberance of America at the turn of the century and celebrates the unmatched skill of the designer and craftsman that brought it to fruition. Though Farnham achieved great success in his career, becoming one of the most important American jewelry designers of his time, he only remained at Tiffany Co. until 1908. By that time, the company had moved away from the artistic tastes of the Gilded Age, and under the creative direction of Louis Comfort Tiffany, it had fully embraced a more modern design aesthetic. The Magnolia Vase was conceived by John T. Curran to be the centerpiece of the fine silver display at the World Columbian Exposition in 1893. In fact, he had long since begun his preparatory drawings of magnolias when he became the head of silver design in 1891, and work was begun to design the Tiffany & Company pavilion for the Chicago Fair. The design of this vase was significantly more modern than that of the Adams Vase, bridging the gap between the hypernaturalism of the 1880s and the stylistic presentations of nature popularized by contemporary artists like René Lalique in France and Louis Comfort Tiffany in the United States. The vase is 31 inches high with a decorative scheme inspired by the distinctive flora of the regions of the United States. The pine cones around the rim represent the northeast, the magnolias the southeast, the succulents the southwest, and the goldenrod the remainder of the country. The stones at the bottom of the vase are opals, polished in a mineral matrix, surrounded by a swirling root-like design, evoking the earth out of which these plants and thus the nation grows. And the shape of the vase was taken from a recently discovered Native American pottery of the Southwest. This is an image of the Tiffany Company pavilion, and here is the Magnolia Vase. The press and public were both astounded by the degree of mastery shown in the crafting of the spirals of magnolias and vines around the vase. Successful enameling requires not only achieving the correct temperature to fuse the enamel to the silver substrate, but also without softening the metal underneath, but the craftsman also had to formulate the recipe. So the enamel and the metal underneath had similar expansion tendencies. And it was a huge technical achievement to fuse so much enamel decoration onto a nearly vertical surface with so few flaws. Records from the Tiffany family archives indicate that Edward C. Moore, the former head of design and Curran's mentor, spent 2 years creating the matte enamels used in this piece. Each flower was constructed by layering different colors in order to realize a lifelike quality that rivaled the vibrancy of real magnolias. This layering indicates the vase likely went through multiple firings in order to achieve the various colors, in order to fuse the various colors. Like Farnham and other Tiffany designers, Curran studied directly from nature when creating this work, and the final layout draws directly from his early drawings, like this one from the collection of the American Art Department. The applied goldenrod was cast of pure gold and soldered into place. The succulents at the feet of the vase were also cast in sterling silver, and these pewter models of these succulents and goldenrod are also part of the American Art Collection. Examination of the vase revealed that the surface of the silver was covered with silver sulfide tarnish, which you see in this image. The goldenrod appeared dark and was indistinguishable from the silver. Further, there was evidence of polish residue caught in the cast flowers, which you can see is the white powder right here. The enamels appeared dull and smudged, and there were losses and associated instability on the surface. Closer examination of the surface revealed that the enamels were at low fire. Low fire enamels would have been able to fuse to the silver substrate without reaching temperatures that might have softened the silver. And under magnification, many of the enamels had a bumpy, crevice surface. Some of the colors were smoother, but retained the appearance of the ground glass that they were made of. X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, a non-destructive elemental analysis technique, was used to analyze each color, and the results indicated that the metal oxide colorants used in the enamels were typical for the 19th century. All of the colors contained a significant amount of lead as well, which had the dual function of lowering their fusing temperature and contributing to their opacity. So I looked at the piece under ultraviolet radiation, and this is the image that I took of that. The majority of color being produced here is actually just from the enamels themselves. It's their typical fluorescence. But what was most important about this image is that I discovered that there was a material painted over it after manufacture, and it's seen as this opaque white fluorescence that you can see in small areas scattered across the surface. There was no record of any sort of treatment that would have had material being painted over the surface so extensively while at the museum that I found, and it became part of the collection in 1899, which was only 6 years after the fair. This is the material, or I'm going to call it overpaint for the remainder of the talk, seen here in normal illumination, and it's this material right here that's chipping off the surface. The scientific research department was able to identify this as an oil-resin mixture of a conifer resin mixed with damar and toned with pigment. And this mixture was available as a restoration varnish commercially at the end of the 19th century into the 20th. Over time, this paint has become more unstable than the original enamel surface. In fact, the majority of losses to the enamels were associated with some kind of impact rather than any inherent instability. For comparison, this loss right here is actually a loss to the enamel, where it looks like the piece was hit and a chip came off, whereas the overpaint is just kind of chipping off. Establishing when the overpaint was applied was integral in determining whether or not it should remain or be removed from the surface. I thought it might be valuable to study contemporary pieces produced by Tiffany Co, and the American Art Department was able to secure a loan from a private collector of 2 other enameled vases designed by Curran for the Columbian Exposition: the Wild Rose vase, seen here in my hand, and the Daisy vase right here. It was thrilling to have these 3 vases on my bench at once, together for the first time since 1893. And it was illuminating to see Curran's design sensibility expressed on a more modest scale. The construction and execution of all 3 was very similar, and I did find restoration material similar to that on the Magnolia Vase, applied to a couple of petals on the Daisy Vase. It's difficult to see on this white slide since it's white paint on a white petal, but that restoration material is right here and right here. It displayed a similar fluorescence and a similar instability as the material on the Magnolia Vase. Returning to the Magnolia Vase, I found the overpaint again in areas with no associated losses or damage, applied almost as a painterly accent rather than as a repair, in colors that did not match the underlying enamel. In fact, the overpaint occurred only in shades of green, cream, yellow, and pink. And you can see it in these 2 images. There's just that yellow accent on the inside petal of this flower and a little bit of pink on this green leaf. I began to formulate a theory about why and when this material may have been applied. I believe it was applied as part of the manufacture process to address early flaws, damage, and inconsistencies in the surface of the enamel. And in support of this theory, I found an exhibition photo of the vase from 1913 where the overpaint is clearly present. Discussions with the curator led to the final decision to leave the overpaint in place. As I noted earlier, the appearance of the enamels was dull and pinkish from the outset of this project. And as treatment progressed, I felt that this was inconsistent with Curran's preparatory drawings and contemporary descriptions of the vase. For example, an article about the fair from 1893 in the Art Amateur commented specifically on the beauty of the blossoms and leaves enameled in purple, white, green, and yellow, not red. The residues of a polishing compound had been found embedded in the goldenrod, and it seemed likely that a similar material may have been on the enamels. I looked at the surface under magnification, and I found material consistent with polishing residue sitting on the surface. And after discussions with the curator, the decision was made to remove it. This is a 100 x image of the surface of one of the enameled flowers, and the polishing compound that I'm referring to is a sort of red material sitting in the crevices of what would otherwise be a yellow leaf, a yellow petal. These images show one flower before and after the removal of the polish residue. Interestingly, the overpaint makes more sense in terms of its palette after this cleaning, and it becomes clear that white, green, yellow, and cream are the dominant colors of this piece. And this image shows one of the flowers in the goldenrod before and after treatment. Once the surface was clean, I began to in-paint some of the losses to the enamel. The toning was done with a mixture of a 30% paraloid B40N, which is an acrylic resin, in acetone bulked with dry pigments and fumed silica. The intention of the toning was to reduce the visual impact of the damage, not to fully mask it, so a slight shadow can be seen in the after-treatment photos of where my fills are. Under close examination, these fills should not be mistaken for either the original enamel or for the later overpaint. This is an overall photograph of the vase before conservation treatment and after. The Magnolia Vase remains a masterpiece of enamel design and technique, and I feel that this treatment was able to reestablish Curran's original vision for the vase and better display the skill of the craftsmen who carried out that demanding task. The Magnolia Vase and Adams Vases were always intended to be showpieces at the center of attention. Their designs are too enthusiastic to be simply placed on a mantle. It has been extremely gratifying for me to have had the opportunity to study both so intimately, and even more to see them reinstalled in the renovated Engel Court. Thank you for your kind attention.